Greetings YouTube, it's 15th of June 2018 and Blizzard have just updated us on the latest with World of Warcraft Classic. This is a version of the game that was announced last year at Blizzcon and it's going to be taking us right back to the vanilla experience, and they've just shared a few extra details today on how that's going to work, and to be honest with you, it looks like things are progressing nicely. So I'm going to leave certain links in the video description if you want to check these things out for yourself. But I will just scroll down this particular post here, and you can just pause the video several times if you want to read it to save actually going to the website itself, so whatever you prefer. But I'm not going to read the whole thing. I will just talk about some of the points that it mentions, and the main one of those is the fact that this is going to be patch 1.12. I believe this was like the final patch before the pre-Burning Crusade content was introduced into the game. So we're going to have a look in a moment at some of those patches so we can just remind ourselves of exactly what this is going to include. But before I say anything else, guys, please let me know what you think about Blizzard bringing one of the later versions of the vanilla experience into World of Warcraft Classic as opposed to one of the earlier editions of World of Warcraft from when it was first released. In all honesty, I would say that it absolutely makes sense to do it this way. Obviously, because this is going to be a classic experience, we're not going to be seeing content updates going forward because that would obviously defeat the purpose. So it seems silly to bring about, you know, the first edition of the game when it first came out and then start bringing out the patches as they were released originally up to patch 1.12, because then players once again get into the habit of getting content updates and then those content updates would just cease. So I can at least see why Blizzard have made this decision, but please let me know what you think in the comment section about WoW Classic launching with patch 1.12. In where we are then currently in terms of WoW Classic development, Blizzard have shared with us in this particular forum post, actually website post, that they've had multiple editions of the Classic game up and running internally as part of their development, but there's been a few issues with those. So first of all, they had the first prototype, which is what they've called it here, and they had patch 1.12 up and running successfully. However, there was a few issues, mainly in terms of the fact that a lot of the modern back-end systems, which Blizzard now like to use, for example with anti-cheating and anti-botting, and just I guess other issues along those lines, were not functioning because they weren't in place back in those days. There was anti-cheating in WoW Classic, but I guess those systems have evolved a lot since that particular point in time, and Blizzard want to make sure that the same back-end that current WoW, modern day WoW, is running with is also what's going to be used with WoW Classic. And the first prototype simply wasn't operating with that. And so we come to the second prototype, which is basically the modern version of the game, by the sounds of it anyway, and I could be reading this wrong, but it's the modern version of the game, but with all the features that have come out since patch 1.12 completely stripped back and removed. So it's the modern architecture, the modern back-end systems, but of course with that vanilla classic experience running. Apparently there have been huge technical obstacles with this particular prototype, basically because, from what I understand, the modern architecture for World of Warcraft is simply not compatible with the older version of World of Warcraft, the client, and the way the databases worked, the way the numbers worked, and all of that stuff. There's been so much in terms of under the hood changes over the years that there's going to be still a lot of work to do to get the modern architecture with everything that comes with that Blizzard want to include, such as anti-cheating, anti-botting, or the in-game support and everything that we've come to know in Classic WoW but doesn't interact with the actual gameplay, and the challenge of getting that working with the original game. But this is the system they want to stick with now. This is the way they want to get it to work. And they have actually included some other technical information, but you can go ahead and read this yourself if you're interested in this side of things, where they're just going to explain some of the differences between Classic WoW and the current version of WoW, and some of the ways they're going to have to manipulate the old version of WoW in order to get it to work with the new version of WoW. So it's fairly interesting, but it won't be to everyone's interest, so I'll leave that for you guys. And I was just thinking ahead actually, and I think one of the cool things about doing it this way, it's one of the big features of World of Warcraft, is the ability to run player-built, custom-built add-ons, and to have those running in the game. Now, if this is going to be, if Classic WoW is going to be basically modern WoW behind the scenes, but just with a classic campaign running on the client, then that will probably mean that if the add-ons work on BFA, on normal, you know, up-to-date WoW, then they should work on Classic WoW also. So I'm just interested to see how that plays out. But there seems to be a better continuity between the two versions of the game if they're going to go ahead with this particular method. But of course, when you're playing, you shouldn't really notice that. It will still be that vanilla, that classic experience. Let's briefly then just have a look at the patches as they came out over the life cycle of World of Warcraft Vanilla, since there were quite a few and they brought quite a few changes to the game, and of course we're going to be having all of those changes included with the Classic experience. So let's just remind ourselves of what they are, because your memories of Classic may actually be a little bit different than what we're actually going to get, depending on, you know, when the time was that you was playing the most, during what part of the cycle of the game. So the game launched in 2004, there were some bug fixes and whatnot with the initial patches, and then the first patch introduced Marathon, so Marathon as a dungeon was not there in the original launch of the game. So for those of you that think a true Classic experience should be the day the game launched, well, you're going to be disappointed already, because there is going to be a lot of extra content on top of that. But I reckon overall this is the way to please most of the fans of WoW Classic. Gowabashi Arena event and features such as the Feast of Great Winter, which was the first holiday introduced into the game, and also the ability to turn your cloak and helms on and off from the options menu. And then we have patch 1.3, and there's some interesting features here. First of all, we get Dire Maul, a dungeon I hate even to this day, by the way. It was such a nightmare to do, that place was. But hey, I'm sure it'll be fun to experience these places back in the Classic experience. And of course we had some outdoor bosses as well, Azurgos and Lord Kozak, and these were amazing spectacles to engage in. I used to love, you know, competing with the opposing faction, trying to kill these guys and take them down in raid groups and what have you. They were quite challenging as well. Meeting stones. Now this is an interesting one. I don't know how these are going to work, because back when meeting stones were first introduced in 1.3, they were basically rubbish. They didn't work as I guess Blizzard wanted them to work. What would happen would be that you'd go to a dungeon, say Dead Mines for example, and then the meeting stone would be there. It doesn't work the same as summoning stones work today, let me just clarify that. Meeting stones would work. You would go to the dungeon, and if you say needed a tank or needed a healer or needed an extra DPS, then you could click the meeting stone, and anybody else that's clicked it will be put into a pool that the meeting stone will then choose from in order to fill the group. And in theory it sounds good. Couple of issues. First of all, there were no cross-server groups back in WoW Classic, which meant that you was only pulling from your particular server. Second of all, you had to actually go to the dungeon and click the stone in order to be added into the pool of players. So it's not like the Looking for Dungeon tool today, where you can open it from wherever you are and just, you know, quickly fill a dungeon group using the cross-server features. And I actually remember very clearly, I was so excited when this feature came out, but I was never once, not a single time, able to ever recruit a single person into my party or be recruited into another party using the meeting stones feature. Now eventually of course meeting stones became summoning stones, and that's what we use them for today. They're very popular. But again, I'll be interested to see how these are going to work in the Classic experience. Will there be a cross-realm option? Will that be part of the, you know, modern architecture that's included with WoW, or will they just be useless and nobody will use them? I'm happy, by the way, for there to be no Looking for Group tool in Classic WoW. That was a feature that came later. But meeting stones was the first stepping stone, no pun intended, of that feature, and they just didn't work. It seems pointless them even existing. But yeah, we'll see how that feature plays out as the Classic comes a little bit closer. Right, 1.4. Now this was pretty interesting. We had a couple of epic quests come for certain classes. Priest and Hunter, they were able to get some epic weapons from going through some of the raids like Molten Core, and also the first incarnation of the PvP honour system. So yes, there will be PvP in Classic of course, and a lot of people actually claim that they prefer the PvP from Classic, so I'm sure they'll be happy about that as well. And then patch 1.5, we have our first two battlegrounds introduced. Ultrat Valley, which was amazing back in the day, especially if you wanted a nice 6 or 7 hour battle, because that game never seemed to end. It's had a lot of changes made to it since. And Warsong Gulch, which is pretty much the same as it is today. Patch 1.6 was the Blackwing Lair patch, but also brought some other features such as Dark Moon Fair, Battle Masters, which worked differently then than they do today, and some class revamps as well. Patch 1.7 was your Zul'Gurub dungeon, and this was a way of getting people raiding that weren't able to get 40 people together for a raid. Yeah, don't forget guys, raiding is 40 player raiding in Classic, so you will have to recruit a few extra people to your guild, so let's hope a lot of your friends are going to be wanting to play this particular version of the game. And also Arathi Basin was introduced, along with Hunter Talents and the Stranglethorn Fishing Holiday thingy. So I think a lot of these features we need, to be honest with you. Classic would get stale very, very quickly if these weren't actually part of the experience. 1.8, we had the 4 Emerald Dragons brought into the game. As with Lord Kazakh and Azuragos, these were outdoor boss fights, and they're no longer available in the game, but they were a lot of fun at the time. They were quite difficult as well. They was on par with the Blackwing Lair dungeon, which had came out a couple of patches ago. And I actually remember that a lot of these bosses were very, very hard back then. But now boss encounters have changed so much with where we are today, and they have so many more mechanics, and players, I think, have just got so good at taking these guys down that I actually wondered just how challenging these originally challenging experiences are actually going to be, going back from what we've got today to what we used to have. So that'll be interesting to see. Look at this, Silithus, totally revamped zone for level 60 players. And this is an interesting one because Silithus, when it was revamped in this patch, is basically Silithus that we have today. Okay, I'm not talking about with the giant sword in it or anything like that, but just the normal leveling experience. You know, the zone that everybody avoids, and they don't do because they go to Blasted Lands instead. Well, that is the revamped Silithus. That is the best zone in Classic WoW, because it's the zone that was revamped. So guys, just remember what the leveling experience was like, okay? You avoid the Classic experience, most of you do, in WoW today, and yet this is what you're going to be having when we actually get back to this. And there's a few other updates as well with the game. Right, let's move on to patch 1.9. This is where we had the gates of Encourage. So 2 raid dungeons, 40 man, 20 man. They're still there. You can explore them today if you want to. And this is where we got the tier 2 models as well that we've come to recognise today as well from raids. And still some of my favourite raiding tier is tier 2 in terms of how those models actually look. Obviously they're not as polygonal, I guess you can say, as some of the models are today. But I guess for nostalgia purposes, I just really enjoy wearing those with my transmog set. And also we get linked auction houses in this patch, which is basically where your alliance auction houses are linked, your horde auction houses are linked, and your neutral auction houses were linked. So nowadays, I'm pretty sure that all the auction houses in the game from all factions are all linked together into one. So that's not what we got here. This was the start of that system, but at least we don't have to go to all the different auction houses on the same faction in order to actually, you know, see the items that we want to purchase, compare the prices. You used to have to do that. You don't anymore. And also the Timbermore hold, the faction got a load more quests and what have you, but it was still a grind if you wanted to get to Exalted with that. And also we got the Lovelies in the Air holiday as well. Right then, so patch 1.10. This is the patch that brought weather into the game, so your rain and, what is it? Rain, snow and sandstorms, I think it is, isn't it? So, you know, we still got that today, I think, haven't we? Tier 0.5 armour sets. This was interesting. This was a good bit of extra content for those of you that weren't quite able to raid or weren't ready to raid, but had become pros at the 5-man content like Stratholme and Scholomance and what have you. Tier 0.5 was basically a series of quests that would allow you to upgrade your dungeon set to a set that was kind of in between the dungeon set and then the tier 1 Molten Core set as well. Patch 1.11, perhaps the dungeon that everybody speaks highly of, which was Naxxramas, the original version of Naxxramas as well, not the Wrath the Lich King version. Basically the same bosses and everything, but tuned for 40-man players, and many would consider to, at least in Classic WoW, have been the hardest raid instance, and in fact perhaps even going forward into Burning Crusade and Wrath of the Lich King as well. So one that people often spoke about and will be glad to see returning, I am sure. Okay, then we have patch 1.12, and this is where we have cross-round battlegrounds introduced and a few other changes. This was basically to set the groundwork for the Burning Crusade. I think because the patch 1.12 is the one that's going to be used, a few people might be confused from what they remember about the game, mainly because so much did change, even a lot of stuff that we haven't spoken about. For example, the fact that for most of Classic WoW, you could enter into dungeons like Scholomance and Stratholme and 5-player dungeons like these, but with 10 players or even 15 players I think at one point, but then by 1.12 this was reduced to 5. The same with Upper Blackrock Spire, I think you used to be able to enter that with 15, but that was reduced to 10. I might have the numbers wrong there, but the point is that a lot of the dungeons were increased in difficulty by the fact that you could no longer enter them with raid groups, you had to enter them with parties, and that was to make the questing fun when they introduced the tier 0.5 set, but again, something that people might not remember, or it might square a little bit differently. So there we have it then, guys, and I've just thought, there's a terrible quest called Jailbreak which you have to do in order to be attuned to Onyxia's lair. Oh, I hated that quest so much. I remember spending 4 hours one evening trying to get it done and failing at it at the end. Oh no, okay, I'm having nightmares about that already. But anyway then, guys, there we have it. That is the WoW Classic experience that we're going to be getting. It's now been confirmed, unless Blizzard change it in the future, but I don't think they will. It's been confirmed. Patch 1.12, and they've explained a little bit as to how that's going to work technically, but again, I'll leave links to both this page here, the WoW wiki page, showing all the patches to the classic version of WoW, and also to that Blizzard main website post as well, explaining some of the things we've talked about here. But folks, let me know your thoughts. Are you going to be playing Classic WoW? Is this something you're looking forward to, or are you not all that bothered by it? I know there's a huge amount of people that are really excited about this. The fact that Blizzard are even doing it when it's something that they, you know, were not interested in for so long. But the fans did speak, and Blizzard did listen, so kudos to them for that. But share your thoughts with us in the comment section, and also what you think of the decision to go for patch 1.12 as the launch edition of Classic WoW. But that's it for me for today, guys. I'll see you next time.